All right. Okay. Okay. Naturally, the word Renaissance from Renescere, which translates as "to be reborn," um, is always kind of an anomaly of what exactly is being reborn. Of course, they will say that the designation will embrace all what the Italians and later others believed happen to be the finest accomplishments of classical antiquity, from art and architecture to poetry and philosophy, and all along reviving classical and Latin Greek. It is this revival, yet also elevating the use of vernacular languages. This cultural phenomena began in Italy in the 14th century during the period that is often called the late Middle Ages and eventually spread to Northern Europe, lasting until the 17th century. In a sense, the Renaissance forms the intellectual bridge between the Middle Ages and the modern era, awakening that inquisitive spirit of humanity concerning the natural realm around them. But rather than simply applying the traditional, often church proscribed definitions for everything that they observed, the centuries of often ecclesiastically enforced stagnation were reversed, often permitting fresh perspectives based upon empirical evidence, which eventually gave rise to the scientific revolution of the 17th century. Without the Renaissance, we would not have the context necessary to make science and scientific inquiry, how do I say this, respectable. Now, there is this old saying, you may have heard of it before, the jack of all trades and the master of none. It's a rather terse observation that one may be able to get, you know, proficient in many areas, perhaps superficially or average or even moderately good if we're lucky, but have never truly focused in one area of note enough to arrive at excellence. Well, um, I have to say this that this reference was first applied to, of all people, William Shakespeare in 1596 by Robert Greene, and that when Master of None was added in the 1700s, it was actually intended as a compliment. But those who readily apply that cliche did not know the Renaissance person, for this person was equal in excellence in many areas, including disciplines that seemingly have no relation to one another. They found a connection, as a variety like botany and math and language and philosophy, but be just as good at every single one. So, in a sense, a jack of all trades and a master of all. That was the Renaissance person. Of course, the two that most typically come to mind when we speak about the Renaissance is Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo. But however, here we go. Well, the so-called Renaissance, happened during this time. There's actually many different possible Renaissance moments throughout Western European history, moments where almost something was going to happen, but it didn't quite go the way it should have or could have. Maybe the better way to put it. There was another Renaissance that was in the 12th century in Western Europe, focusing upon materials that were discovered in Muslim Spain, inclusive of Arabic works and Greek works in Arabic translations, and focusing on math and science and philosophy, but applied in a Christian context, of course. Now, what I want to say here is that there was a kind of movement, there was a revival, right? But it looks like that they weren't ready for more of a secular kind of context. Also, so what will happen is that you have so much learning. I don't want to take too long on this one, but ancient learning, you know, when the Muslims, uh, took over much of the Middle East from the Byzantine Empire, right? They inherited a whole bunch of learning, and that went into the Umayyads and the Abbasids, and as Islam, as Arabs, as well as of course other groups. There's a whole mix of different groups, Berbers and so forth, and Persians, and yeah, they moved across the North Africa. They arrived in Spain in 711. Just think of the Slurpee, and then they brought their ideas there. But as we well know, those ideas when it comes to philosophy was mostly Aristotle. It was not Plato. So Aristotelian ideas were very popular, mixing with Muslim philosophy on the nature of God. So what will happen is there's a great amount of knowledge in Muslim Spain. Then with the Reconquista and taking Toledo, Holy Toledo, that learning then went to the West. But how they applied it was within a religious context. A Christian movement that's known as scholasticism. What a great word, right? Scholasticism. Now, the scholastic movement dominated the Western European universities from 1100 to 1700. In fact, let's go take a look at the first picture so you get an idea of this kind of image of that. Already central. Obviously, scholasticism was very important there to at the University of Bologna, for example, the University of Paris. Much of the deductive strategies were based on dialectical reasoning in the classroom, which means, of course, first of all, a topic is brought up and drawn upon tradition and is placed into a form of a question. And then second, arguments opposed to this idea are then brought up. And then third, counter arguments are addressed to the first set of arguments against the traditional idea. And then fourth, a counter argument is proposed, and so forth. The emphasis was to also harmonize Christian theology with classical and late antiquity philosophy, but it is mostly Aristotle. Plato would arrive very late in the curriculum. We'll go into that. Some of the most prominent scholastic doctors include Anselm of Canterbury. He's from 1033 to 1109. Who satisfy the ontological arguments for the existence of God as well as the idea of atonement. You guys may have heard of Peter Abelard, 1079 to 1142, who is often credited with establishing the importance of Aristotle in relation to Christian thoughts. You have others, of course. I can look into these. There's a whole bunch, Alexander of Hales, Albertus Magnus, right? Who asserted that all natural things were composed of the composition of matter and form with God, absolutely governing it all. You got Duns Scotus. But, when I say scholasticism, most people just go, what? So make it easy. Let's go to the next picture. Most people, though, however, will hear about, yes, William of Ockham, and of course, Occam's razor, asserting that amongst competing hypotheses, the one with the fewest assumptions should be selected. So Occam's razor is a principle in philosophy and problem solving that suggests that the simplest explanation requiring the fewest assumptions is often the correct one. It does not guarantee the truth of the simplest explanation, but rather encourages minimizing unnecessary complications. Its core message is don't multiply entities beyond necessity. So I like these examples. I just can't resist. Lost keys. This happens to maybe a lot of us at different times. I've lost my keys within the last couple of weeks. Instead of assuming you've been robbed or there's a household ghost, Occam's razor would suggest you simply misplaced them. Or, then of course there's others like animal crop circles, and rather than believing mysterious forces or aliens are responsible for crop circles, a simple explanation is that some deer trampled on the crops. These are these just ideas and so forth. Let's go to the next one because I have a sense of humor. Of course, oftentimes in academia, Occam's razor seems more like this. You have theoretically, when faced with two possible explanations, the simpler of the two is the one most likely to be true. However, the Occam's professor razor is when faced with two possible ways of doing something, the more complicated one is the one your professor will most likely ask you to do. So there he is, couldn't resist, but I'm sorry. Okay, so moving right along to go to the next picture. But as for the origins of the Renaissance, there are many, but the best way to view it is that this era is a result of multiple historical threads coming together at the right place and the right time. And that place, by most accounts, is Florence in Tuscany in the 14th century, especially thriving under the patronage of the Medici family, the dominant family in the city at the time. Many scholars claim that the Medici family, if it wasn't for them, that the Renaissance would not have occurred. Let's go to the next picture. This is my photo of the Duomo in Florence. I just thought it was kind of neat. The first mention the Medici family dates to an obscure document from 1230. Right, they basically rose into power various marriages of convenience and sometimes inconvenience, and business partnerships and so forth. They actually made a lot of money in sheep. The wool trade was basically the focus, and they traded as far as Spain and France. Eventually, they amassed enough to create a bank, and so that was founded by Giovanni di Bicci di Medici. Bicci di Medici. Sorry, I could be saying that all night long. Okay, who founded the Medici Bank? But it was Giovanni's son, Cosimo di Giovanni Medici, lived from 1389 to 1464. That made the most impact upon the Renaissance. Let's go to the next picture. There he is. He's looking pretty happy there. That's on his good day. Cosimo was a master politician. He ruled Florence for much of the Renaissance, and he did become the definitive patron of the arts, as well as supporting the humanities and sciences. During his lifetime, again, the Renaissance would not be possible from many perspectives without the patronage of this family. I love one of his quotes that he says. So I'm going to be quoting here Cosmo. He says as follows. He says, "All those things have given me the greatest satisfaction and contentment because they are not only for the honor of God, but are likewise for my own remembrance. For 50 years," he says, "I have done nothing else but earn money and spend money. And it became clear that spending money gives me greater pleasure than earning it." Can many of you relate with this one? Okay, so by the way, it will be Cosimo who brought Platon, the famous Platonist Greek scholar, to his court. We'll talk about that soon. So Cosimo's grandson, Lorenzo de' Medici, 1449 to 1492. Let's go to the next picture. That's really, he's looking a little small there. Often proclaimed the Magnificent, was another major patron of the arts, as well as a shrewd politician and diplomat, but he ruined the family business because of his neglect. Beyond the setting of Florence and the patronage of the Medici family, another factor for the spread of the Renaissance was the general spread of an intellectual movement throughout Italy that focused upon ancient Roman legacy, from materials surviving in Italy itself and then further afield in Western Europe. Let's go to the next picture. There he is. So, and of course, that's Francisco Petrarch, lived from 1304 to 1474. He was Petrarch was the son of a notary from Arezzo, but he did spend much of his early years living in Florence. So then again, there is another Florence connection, as you can see. And what happens is that the Black Gulfs, this group, expelled his family from the area. And so Petrarch resettled in Avignon around 1309, which became the seat of the papacy under Clement V. And also he lived in a little village known as Campatras, just east of Avignon. Let's go to the next picture so you see what Avignon looks like. This is my photo of Avignon. Hope you like it. Yeah, that's when I was there. Between 1319 and 1323, Petrarch studied at Montpellier and then went on to study law at Bologna from 1323 to 1325. Upon his father's death, he returned to Avignon and occupied with various clerical duties. But of course, he gained some fame. We'll tell you how that happens. Petrarch's world was completely transformed the moment he saw a woman by the name of Laura. Go to the next picture. Laura. There she is in the church of Saint Claire in d'Avignon. He saw her on April 6, 1327. In that moment, Petrarch viewed her as his literary muse. Yes, she became his queen of poetry. Unfortunately, she was actually married. She had been married for 2 years, married at the age of 15 to a certain Count Hughes, who Petrarch, of course, was not too happy about. So he decided to take the route of, well, courtly love. So he could sing her praises, but he was not allowed to touch her. Sadly, Laura died at the young age of 38 in 1348. Of course, Petrarch notes, after writing all this wonderful works, connected to her praises and so forth, which really was very inspirational. He writes that she died on the exact day he saw her, on April 6th, Good Friday, and even the exact hour 21 years later. And he said, one point, he says, to be able to say how much you love is to love but little. By the way, a little bit of trivia. Later on, a humanist by the name of Maurice Scavy was visiting Avignon, and he ordered her tomb to be opened, and he found inside a lead box. And there was a medal in that lead box of a woman ripping at her heart on the lid of it. And inside of this box, he found a sonnet by Petrarch. So she reciprocated in the afterlife. So why am I talking about this? Well, we move to the next picture. You see, what happens is another transformative moment occurred in 1337. What's going to happen is Petrarch, he's going to gain fame and he's going to gain fortune. And as a result of that, he wants to travel around and start looking at various ancient sites. So this is how he financed himself. So 1337, when Petrarch visited Rome for the first time, he hoped to see magnificent remnants from Rome's eternal glorious past. You can see here, not much. You can end the pictures. Thank you so much, Margie. We have a little series there, but all in a row there. So he's excited. He's wanting to see ancient Rome, the ancient Rome that he's read so much about. But all he found was a bunch of sad ruins. He writes, "Where are the numerous constructions erected by Agrippa, of which only the Pantheon remains? Where are the splendorous palaces of the emperors?" Now, before he arrived in Rome, Petrarch was already devoting himself to reading many of the Latin classics, and he hoped to find many of the locations described with such pride by these ancient authors. But instead, he found just a mere fragment with so much destroyed or or buried or obscured by more recent constructions. Petrarch decided that he wished to revive Rome, first in his imagination, carefully walking about the city and attempting to grasp the topography, trying to see how it appeared in ancient times. He just kind of walks around, surveys it. Next, he began to search for old statues and artifacts from the city in order to preserve them. Eventually, this inspired him to start collecting old manuscripts so that more of ancient Rome could be preserved, at least in the written word. Petrarch became virtually obsessed with the idea of ancient Rome, hoping that the more he collected, the more he could enable his own imagination to bring him back to that age, an era that he conceded was much more glorious than his own. At one point, Petrarch said as follows. He said, "I would have preferred to have been born in any other time than our own." Well, then again, Petrarch is living in the 1300s, and yeah, 100-year war, bubonic plague, not a great century. so I get it, at least for Western Europe. Meanwhile, as I said, Petrarch was, because of his natural literary talents, Laura, right? He started gaining wealth. So by 1341, Petrarch was declared a poet laureate in Rome and continued to grow wealthy. He started touring various places. He's asked to join many diplomatic missions. So his prestige really was exemplified. Now he could pursue his dream of collecting old Latin manuscripts from libraries and archives all over the place, from France and Germany and Spain. Doesn't that sound kind of dreamy? Okay, maybe just to me, visiting old musty, dusty libraries, and that kind of looks like that, So maybe I have my own at home, so I shouldn't say much. Eventually, Petrarch decided to settle down, making Padua his home in 1367. He focused on the religious life. So this is the beginning of an interest in ancient Rome and an ancient world. But of course, it is a kind of a literati kind of focus on there, kind of like looking at the good old days. Weren't those good old days? Weren't they so great? I really don't give him full credit, as many do, for starting the Renaissance. Sure, he's generated interest in the past, but he leaves it just there. The past, right? He doesn't. There's none of this movement to let's make this happen again, right? Let's do this all over again, So yeah, but just like, oh, the good old days, yeah. It sounds like it's just kind of the swan song. Now, of course, I mean, he didn't know he was in the Middle Ages, because nobody knows that there are Middle Ages in the middle, because that comes out later on. But it's still kind of a interesting era that was pretty depressing at times. There's another person who's important, very important when it comes to manuscripts. His name is Poggio Bractolini. Bractolini, 1380 to 1459. He, by the way, just think of broccoli. Anyway, Bractolini, what he did is he recovered much of the ancient works of Cicero, Quintilian, Statius, Valerius Flaccus, Lucretius, Silius Itellicus, Fretoninus, that's he remembers Aqueducts of Rome work, Columelia, Manelius, Vitruvius, yeah, that's the architect who will inspire Leonardo da Vinci, right? The Vitruvian Man, remember, guys? Of course, Avianus Marcellinus, Flavius Caper, Nonius Marcellus, and Eutychus, of course, on the various philosophers. So, yeah, that one guy unraveled all those, found them out. So he is another one who brings it to the fore. He did enter the service of working with the Pope Boniface the Ninth, who was in charge. Actually, we'll go through all the popes, but he worked for the popes. And then he had some free time, not much. And in his free time, he collected manuscripts. Okay, so there is an interest in the past. Antiquarian, passe, but still an interest. Like, oh, wouldn't it be great? So where does it start? Where does it all begin? That's the question. Or where do things ignite? Well, let's go there. So, first of all, I told you about scholasticism, and scholasticism, it was mostly religious. It didn't do anything that was secular all that much, right? And when it came to the writings, this is manuscripts. It takes a while for to hand copy a manuscript, right? Can you imagine? But see, there's a guy by the name of Gutenberg. Gutenberg, he didn't discover printing, because we got to give the Chinese credit for that. The Chinese had printing in the Song Dynasty, going back to the Tang Dynasty. So yeah, they had that printing. But still, for Europe, it's all new. So Gutenberg Press was an operation in 1440, and so that means a lot of ideas that would have been written out in a manuscript taking forever were now probably not that noise, but maybe like this. Okay, that's probably better. And the point of the matter is that you can print it out, which means the information can go out faster. It's like the internet age, right? Dissemination of knowledge is easier because of this technology. So this is the perfect time for the Renaissance to come about. The 1440s, 1450s, right? So you're seeing this. At that same time, of course, Constantinople falls in 1453. So, but there's still a person who comes along a little bit earlier in the printing press, but will take advantage of it as far as the writings. And that is a guy by the name of Platon. This genius, it is so hard to define this man. So George Gemistus Platon, 1355 to 1454, while often declared as one of the most original of all Byzantine thinkers from the East, Platon is also one of the most shrouded in mystery because of his very controversial religious and political views during his time. He was officially Greek Orthodox, so he is from, obviously, the East, right? But he merged his mystical faith with Greek philosophy, especially that with Plato and the Neoplatonists. He also mixed it with Jewish Kabbalah perspectives. He also mixed his beliefs with Zoroastrianism, and he also mixed his beliefs with what are called the Chaldean oracles. So he mixed them all together. So it's very fascinating individual. Now, Platon, so now it's fair to say that much of his early age, ranging up to the age of 50, is one of the most shrouded in mystery because of his very controversial views. Now, here we go. So, of course, one thing is certain, that early on, he did anger the Orthodox Church in the East. Many of the hierarchy were suspicious of his very long stay with who they call the enemy. In fact, that would be specifically Gennadius Scholarius described Platon's stay at the, quote, court of the barbarians. Well, what is this court? Well, Platon was staying with the Turks, with the Ottoman Turks at either Bursa or Adrianople. The court was, of course, that of the Ottoman Sultan Murat I, who desired to surround himself with intellectuals and men of good culture. He was known at this place. Platon was known to have studied under a Jewish scholar by the name of Elisha and studied through him and others Aristotle, the Kabbalah, and Zoroastrianism. In fact, Platon considered Zoroaster to not only be the predecessor of Plato, which was, of course, controversial enough to the Orthodox theologians who praised his works, but also one of the most eminent of all legislators and a philosophy dedicated to seeking wisdom. Now, I know you're going, wait, this is this, Dr. Reedfield, isn't this isn't this the you know, the 1400s? Yeah. I mean, isn't this the age of Christianity? Yeah. And he's talking openly about praising Zoroastrianism and Greek philosophy and the Kabbalah. Yeah. Huh. And then, of course, that is the Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium. So there is still a certain amount of freedom. Yeah. But let's keep going. So all these ideas he put in paper. It is published. The work is called The Summary of Zoroaster and Plato, which instantly became, of course, controversial. Now, I got to tell you, you want to follow the story. You have to follow the story because it is Platon that starts the Renaissance. This is an awkward pause that I want to have. There. Had to do that. What? Yeah, so you want to follow the story. This guy with this diverse background is what's going to ignite the Renaissance. Yeah. So I haven't heard this before. I know. That's why you're here right now, listening to me. This is according to the beliefs of that time. That's what I like to do, not according to modern era. What do they think? They think this. We'll go into that. Is this good? You're going to see in detail how the Renaissance started, who was involved, one piece after the other, and we'll go into, as a result, the understanding of humanism. We'll go into understanding of the liberal arts. Okay, so you got to follow this trail with me, okay? Because I see somebody going, why are you talking about Platon so much? You have to hear him. Otherwise, nothing else is going to make sense. Okay. It's like putting together the perfect mousetrap. Okay. So he's a polymath. He has all these different ideas. He's into Zoroastrianism. He's into the Kabbalah. He's into Greek philosophy. He's into Plato, Neoplatonism. Okay. So yeah. Platon revered Zoroaster as the inspiration behind the Chaldean oracles. He was into the Chaldean oracles too. Yes, he was. Of course, the Chaldean oracles today survive only in fragments, but much of what we can glean through these remnants are intended to be revelation from the gods that inform that the world is dualistic, much like in Zoroastrianism, with the upper realm of the intelligibles consisting of spirit and collecting form, which is the good, and the lower realm of matter, which is the material and the realm of sometimes evil, depends, sometimes just lack thereof good. The Chaldean oracles, like the Christian Trinity, is understood to be in three parts, but there the similarities end for the most part. The first component is the idea of the eternal and impenetrable monad, or the one, this will be important, the one, known as the paternal intellect, or the first fire, emanating from this paternal intellect or first fire arrives the second intellect, which is the dyadic, because it unites the paternal monad with the physical world of the second intellect's creation. The second intellect thus acts as a bridge between the two worlds. The second intellect is often described as, well, the second fire. Finally, the third part of the Chaldean deity is the cosmic soul. The Chaldean oracles identifies this cosmic soul as specifically Hecate. And she, Hecate, is the power that both brings together and keeps apart the first and second transcendental fires. So there you have it. So yeah, so this Chaldean oracles continue. Now, of course, I could tell you forever about the Chaldean oracles. I won't, but I will just tell you that I've already done a long talk that goes for about 2.5 hours just on this topic alone. So there you have it. But and I made all these cool flashcards for that. So this is just kind of an advertisement, so you know that there's more there. so Platon studied this in detail. Sometime during his tenure at the court of Murat I, who, by the way, is a Muslim. Here is this Orthodox Christian thinker delving into all these areas, hanging out at the Turkish court, and learning also Jewish mystical traditions and wanting to bring it all together. He even journeyed on to Cyprus and Palestine, gathering more and more philosophical information from various surviving texts and religious teachers. You can imagine how controversial he was when he returned to Constantinople. When he got back, he gave a series of lectures on Platonism at the university that were regarded as, well, how do I say this, highly subversive. And in fact, many considered him a heretic, and worse still for the Orthodox establishment. Even they said that he must be a Hellene. He must be a pagan. George Scholarius, one of his own students, believed that Platon's passionate views of Plato were suspect. Perhaps he was just incensed by his teacher's consistent attack on Aristotle, whom Scholarius had chosen to advocate as his personal favorite over and above Plato. Of course, his suggestions against his own teacher to the emperor did not help Platon's position in Constantinople. So the emperor now, actually, the Emperor Manuel II is a friend of Platon, but the complaint is heard. And he doesn't really want to get rid of Platon from Constantinople, but he says, well, why don't you go to a little place? It's a beautiful place in Mistra on the Peloponnese. It's pretty close to ancient Sparta. Why don't you go there? It's a great environment for your academic pursuits. And Platon's all, yeah, I'll do it. But what happens is that Platon, you may be considered a heretic, but he is so great and knowledgeable about emanations, how the monad, the one, emanates the many, and so forth. And they need him for those Trinitarian disputes going on between East and West. What's going on is that at this time, during the 1430s, Constantinople is still the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire. Of course, there's no Eastern Roman Empire, just Roman Empire at that point. Although we call it Byzantium, it's still the capital, but it's pressed on all sides by the Ottoman Turks. So the Eastern Church, the Greek Orthodox Church, is seeking union with the Western Church. It's seeking to unite itself, so they're going to get some help, maybe a crusade or something to help us. And but the problem is that though the West is insisting on this idea of the filioque, it's that the procession of the Spirit comes from the Father, filioque, and the Son, and meanwhile the Eastern Church says is that the Holy Spirit just comes from God. And the East says they believe this is, subordinating the Holy Spirit by making it second to God the Son. So it's like, as opposed to God the Son, God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. If the procession goes through those three in that order, they're seeing that this is almost a ditheism. You're putting God the Father, God the Son as higher up than the Spirit. So, but that's not what the West means, and everything's all messed up. And the person who's good at doing this is Plethon. So they say, hey, Plethon, you're going to go to this meeting. I am? Yes. What meeting is that? It's called the Ferrara Florence Conference. You're going to be there. So there he goes. Now he's there. Ferrara, there's a plague going on, so they end up in Florence. So he is a member of the Byzantine delegation to the West. He's considered very valuable because of his idea of the procession of the Holy Spirit. He had actually written on that topic, so he knew a lot about it. So, hey, he may be this, but he's good at this, and he's going to win the day to convince those in the West that, you know, the Spirit, we're saying the same thing, just using different language. So that's it, you know. Okay, so yeah, he didn't do much. He played a very small role in the council, but he's there. And, you know, Plethon is just a wanderer. He's an explorer. And he started making lectures on Plato, especially his dialogues. And it created a huge sensation. You see, Plato's dialogues were completely unknown in its original Greek to these Italian audiences, completely unknown. And he knew it, and he knew that they wanted more. This was a quintessential moment when the Greek heritage, especially the legacy of Plato, was all so fully bequeathed to the very large body of Latin humanists eager to hear more about this ancient Greek philosopher who stood merely as this shadow behind the esteemed Aristotle. The latter, of course, obviously so championed by the West after his reintroduction from Muslim Spain, especially by the scholars of scholasticism in the 11th and 12th century. So all of a sudden, it's like they didn't have a Plato. They had three poorly translated in Latin works of Plato. That's it. So now all of a sudden, Plato was smart. Plethon was smart. He brought all these manuscripts with him of Plato. So they're getting this for the first time, you know, since antiquity. Plato has come back. This is a central idea for the Renaissance. Platonism is central. Aristotelian ideas, there would be no Renaissance with Aristotle. Absolutely not possible. We'll go into that. But Plato, it's possible, and you will see exactly why and how that creates the idea of humanism. Is this good? Now you're waking up. So he's popular, right? So while in Florence, Plethon wrote many philosophical tracts, the most significant highlighting the difference between the philosophies of Plato and Aristotle. It's called The Difference. Why don't we take a look? Margie, let's take a look at old Plethon, see what he looks like. There he is. Oh, that's a real small picture. Okay, well, that's an actual picture of Plethon from a mural, but it's so small. I think that, well, let's go to the next one, just because. Okay, this is right here is the Chaldean oracles, an image that was done later on. I kind of like it. Go to the next image. That's good. Here is the Neoplatonism. There you got. There's the one. There's the intellect. There's the world soul right there. That's good. Yeah, thank you. And go to the next one. There's a difference between Plato and Aristotle. So I'm going to be reading this, but so what happens here? Keep that up. That's good. Thank you. So for Plethon, Plato's idea of the deity of God was by far more exalted than Aristotle, he says in his work on The Difference, declaring that Plato's God was, quote, the creator of every kind of intelligible and separate substance, and hence of our entire universe, unquote. While Aristotle acts as God as merely a natural automaton, his prime mover only beginning the process and then sitting back uninvolved. According to Platon's Plato, God is not only the beginning of the process of existence, but is also the end and final cause. Yet even here, Platon's deity is eternal, for beginning and end were merely conventional terms that meant little to a god who happened to be outside of time. In marked contrast, Platon viewed Aristotle's God as limited and reduced to succumbing to the mandates of movement and change, so that when movement and change ceased, when it stopped, so did Aristotle's God in his view. So that's not eternal. Now, George Scalarius responded. He heard this, he responded with a defense of Aristotle. That's the name of his work, Defense of Aristotle. And this in turn led to Platon's famous reply. The argument expanded from here, first to those who knew Plato best, those who were expatriate Byzantine scholars who recently forsook their turbulent and decaying empire for the Latin West. But eventually the conversation would carry on to the Italian humanists. Thank you. So you had a chance to take a look at that. Thank you, Margie, for that. So one man loved him above the rest. Who is that? Cosimo de' Medici. Cosimo? Yes. As a result, Platon became the Medici's main inspiration for the founding of the famous Platonic Academy in Florence, which of course changed the philosophical landscape of Italy forever, right? In fact, this academy that was founded was officially dedicated to him. You didn't know that? Yeah. So now Platon not only had admirers and friends in Italy, but students and even a school that was inspired by him. His philosophical contributions would go on here into the West. During this time, he adopted the pseudonym Platon, for before he was merely known as George, George Gemistos, but now he was Platon, which means abundant, with a connotation of being the second Plato. Platon. Here he also wrote a work on virtues and an essay on the first century Greek geographer Strabo. Oh no, I'm sorry, but let's talk about Strabo. Okay, so okay, meanwhile, so Platon is there. He's kind of inspiring the philosophy behind the Renaissance. We'll go into detail. Don't worry, extreme detail. So you'll get everything you want. But you know, he's causing lots of stirring around just by walking around Florence. He's stirring everybody up. What a magnificent man this is. You know, they're not even sure what is he. Is he a pagan? Is he a heretic? Is he a Muslim? Is he a Jew? Is he, is he a follower of Zoroaster? We don't know, but hey, he's here for a church conference and he's not attending that much. But the point is that now he's writing on this first century geographer by the name of Strabo. Why is that important? Well, what happens is that Platon meets somebody by the name of Toscanelli. Why is that important? Toscanelli, he met the Byzantine scholar Platon, and who did introduce him to this geographer from the first century BCE CE. He also, who was basically unknown in Italy, and who expanded knowledge of the world as being round. So what happened is Strabo believed the world was round and had described it as an orb, and obviously the Romans knew the world was round. Even those during this time knew the world was round. But the problem is, and it is a problem, is that Strabo calculated the circumference of the earth. Now, a guy by the name of Eustosthenes, who was one of the librarians of Alexandria back in the 3rd century BCE, did calculate the circumference of the earth, and it was pretty close to our own, about 8 miles short. But Strabo, he messed up, and he made the world smaller, really small, as a globe. And Tuscanelli, was inspired this idea about this round earth, and wanted to. He said, as opposed to going across, maybe across the trade routes towards the east, across Asia, maybe we could just go across the Atlantic Ocean. Well, Tuscanelli, he couldn't get anybody to be convinced. He went to King Alfonso V of Portugal, who opposed him, and even sailing around Africa, and he gave up his idea. So Tuscanelli gave his map to Christopher Columbus. And Christopher Columbus says, we can do this. It's a small world after all. It's a small world after all. And we can just cross right over. Strabo makes it possible. His calculations are great. So when we just cross over, we'll run into Indonesia and India and all that stuff, the Spice Islands. This is great. So basically, Platon, by way of Tuscanelli, inspires Christopher Columbus with the small earth theory. How's that? I told you this guy causes a mess wherever he goes. Okay. Let's pull this back. Pull it back. Okay, so where do we go from here? So working for Cosmo de' Medici in translating Plato's writings from Greek into Latin in the late 1400s was a certain Marsilio Ficino. Ficino, 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 1433 to 1499. Now, Ficino was long associated with Cosmo de' Medici, for his father was his personal court physician. Soon, Ficino proved himself as quite an academic, treasuring the classics and learning both Greek and Latin. So Cosmo de' Medici decided that he should be a perfect tutor for his grandson, Lorenzo. Ficino was also a physician, just like his father, and was dedicated vegetarian for health reasons. Now, when the Greek bishops from Constantinople came to the West for the Council of Ferrara Florence, held between 1438 to 1445, it's a long time, to discuss possible union with the Catholic Church in hopes to gain support against the Ottoman Turks, who were heavily bearing down on their capital. Ficino, was present, absorbing every discussion and debate. But it was his meeting with Platon, the second Plato, that changed him most of all, turning Ficino into a passionate Neoplatonist. Yeah, so now we will talk about Ficino, but of course, what about Platon? What happens to Platon? Well, Platon just he leaves, making a huge impression upon everybody. He leaves. He returns to Mistra, and he writes a work on the laws. And then Platon, in his not really retirement, he wrote. He actually made Mistra into like this little ideal kind of based on Plato's Republic. His last work was most controversial and was completed only at the end of his life. He died at 90. Platon proposed a new religion where the ancient deities were again revived. Platon calls his monad the one emanating from the many, and he calls it also Zeus. His Poseidon, who acts in the same manner as the Logos of Christianity's Trinity, is the second part. And a third in the order is not Hecate, but Hera, who is a divine creatrix of the material world. And of course, and so this pagan circle was called the Brotherhood. You're looking at me like, wait, what? He went back to Mistra and did what? He formed a pagan religion? Wait, how come we never heard of this? No, I know. You're just like looking at me like Zeus, Poseidon, Hera. He's getting away with it. Oh yeah, he got away with it. But still, those in the Latin West really miss him because he's the inspiration for so much, and you'll see exactly how in a minute. And so, did you know that the Italians actually steal his body after he dies? And they take his body to Rimini, where his body is to this day. And at Rimini, there is an inscription that says this on his tomb. It declares, the greatest philosopher of his time. What's the Italian perspective of Platon? The greatest philosopher of his time at that time. So when I say that Platon is important, I mean it. And so do the Italians. If you're Italian, going, hey, I know. All right. So let's keep going. So now the baton, sorry, now the next person to gain the spirit, so to speak, of course, is Ficino. And so what does Ficino do? Well, so after Platon left, Ficino found a new inspiration in a certain John Agaropoulos, who is a traveling philosopher and lecturer. He became one of his eager students. Aragopoulos originated from Constantinople. He came to Italy in 1439. He was there to attend the conference. And then he returned again because he went back to Constantinople. When Constantinople fell in 1453, he moved back after, well, actually went to the Peloponnesian Peninsula, and then he moved back there in 1456. But anyway, so he lectured about and became a resident. And John Aragopoulos lectured about focuses activities in Florence, Padua, and Rome. And many of these ideas were, again, Neoplatonism. And a person who loved attending his lectures was a certain Leonardo da Vinci. So Leonardo is there. So, by the way, poor John Argyropoulos, he died having consumed too much watermelon. So naturally, as I talked about, we now have Plato's Academy. So who's going to be in charge? Ficino is going to be in charge. That's right. Ficino's in charge of the establishment. Now, here we go. So let's take a look at the pictures here. Ficino. There he is. There he is. Okay, so we got there. Wow, we found him right away. So yeah, Marsilio Ficino. There he is. And as I said, you have Plato's Academy in Florence, which you can visit. Let's go to the next picture. There it is. That's Plato's Academy, just outside of Florence. Let's talk about this academy a little bit. So basically, it thrived starting especially in 1462. It was moved close to Cosimo's villa. There was about 200 members. Brachesi, Concales, Landino, Patiana, Pico di Mirando, lots of interesting individuals. But what I find is fascinating is that, it's beautiful. It's a beautiful place. It's full of gardens of orange and olive trees. It became a healing resort. Ficino, oftentimes he would sit in the garden next to a statue of Plato, and strum his lyre and sing Orphic hymns. That's right, that have been recently discovered. He'd be singing these Orphic hymns. Meanwhile, as you enter into this establishment, the chamber was perfumed with frankincense. This is just a place to be. Ficino actually wrote various rhapsodies about Venus. He loved Venus, describing her as the transformative force for the human soul. And so she is the definitive aspect of beauty, of good. In fact, he embraced Plato's idea of Venus being in two aspects: the earthly goddess, which is connected to physical love, and the heavenly goddess, which is connected to the intellect, connected to intellectual love. And so what happened is that you can see where we're going with this one, is that he would actually, as he's playing the lyre, he also talked about his ideals of music therapy. So basically Venus was connected to a soft and yielding atmosphere as you play the music. Mercury, upbeat and happy. But this music is the opening to you towards heaven. The arts, in fact, open you to heaven, to the world above. One of his sayings was, "We play the lyre precisely to become unstrung." We play the lyre precisely to become unstrung. I think some of us need to be unstrung every now, right? Ficino, of course, inspires many artists by his love of Aphrodite, of Venus. You guys ever heard of, let's go to the next picture. Like, you guys ever heard of Botticelli's The Birth of Venus? Yeah, from the when? Oh, yeah, from the 1480s. You mean when he was the instructor there? Yes, there's influence there. Once again, many scholars, including Edgar Wynne and Ernest Gombrich, talk about the fact that this is actually a Neoplatonic allegory. It's an interpretation of divine love, a divine love, that ascent of Venus that you feel when you look at this. It brings in that higher vision. And so you're supposed to look at this, and your mind is supposed to be left feeling this love. Of course, also the other work by Botticelli, let's look to the next one, the Primavera. Go to the next photo. And this is a Neoplatonic allegory of the fertility of the world. So yes, you do see and feel the inspiration from this particular school dedicated to Plato. It was dissolved in 1522, so it thrived between 1462 and 1522, although it was founded a little earlier. That's the thriving period of time. So thank you so much, Margie. That's great. So you can see the connections here, right? Let's go deeper. Naturally, in 1484, Ficino published his massive corpus of Plato, now translated from Greek into Latin, the whole thing for the first time. And you have now the aid of the printing press so that it can be spread out everywhere. Ficino also had translated the works of the Neoplatonists, including, for the first time, Plotinus, Porphyry, and Iamblichus, the latter author introducing the magical system known as theurgy, which would fundamentally transform magic. Introducing was oftentimes called ceremonial magic in retrospect. Ficino adopted the idea that the world itself possessed a soul. He says, there will be some men or other, superstitious and blind, who see life plain in even the lowest animals and the meanest plants, but do not see life in the heavens or in the world. Now, if those little men grant life to the smallest particles of the world, what folly, what envy, neither to know that the whole in which we live and move and have our being is itself alive, nor to wish this to be so. So it moves into, you could hear this, sounds like a little bit of animism going on there too. Beyond the rediscovery of Plato in the Latin West, the other sensational discovery were the works of one Hermes Trismegistus, uncovered by the monk Leonardo di Pistoia in 1460, one of the many agents of Cosmo de' Medici, searching for ancient manuscripts in various dusty archives throughout Europe. The Hermetica, of course, are these Egyptian Greek magical wisdom texts written in both Greek and Latin. I've done a talk on this already, so you can look that up. Where Hermes Trismegistus, a combination of the Greek Hermes and the Egyptian Thoth, both deities dedicated to writing and magic, discuss the nature of the universe with various disciples, including Asclepius, Ammon, and Thoth. Much of the materials are ascribed to the school of Ammianus Sacus, which thrived in the 2nd century CE. And of course, obviously, Ammianus Sacus will be the teacher for the beginning of Plautus, the beginning of Neoplatonism. And Ammianus Sacus, by the way, was partly from Indian background. He's from Alexandria, but he had a partly Indian heritage. Sakyas, like a Buddha. Just throw that in for free. Eventually, these philosophical magical writings reached the Michael Psellus, who lived from 1017 to 1096, and eventually reached the West. Well, when Cosmo de' Medici heard about the mystical Hermetic corpus and knew it was accessible, he said, you know what? I'm going to reassign the translation of this work to Marsilio Ficino, and so he translated this work instead. What? Yes, everything is coming through this school. Is this amazing? You can visit this place if you want. Go to Florence. In medicine, Marsilio Ficino taught how one could capture or manipulate celestial magical cords to help a patient through various illnesses by applying magical, what he calls magical lures or baits, utilizing a technique employing the concept of like attracts like. Hence, he said that certain stones and metals, plants and organic matter, vapors and smells, sounds like his music we talked about, and words and mental activities and states such as employing reason, entering into mystical contemplation, and even envisioning certain actions through the imagination could capture and attract these celestial energies if one reached the right metaphysical frequency. Whoa, I know. So knowing well the ages of humanity of Hesiod, Ficino believed that we were entering a new golden age, saying this century, like a gold age, has restored to light the liberal arts, which were almost extinct. This is a quote by him. Grammar, poetry, rhetoric, painting, sculpture, architecture, music. This century appears to have perfected astrology. So what's going to happen now is, hey, the liberal arts is coming back. Unlike Petrarch, where, oh, those were the good old days. Kind of wish we had those days again. Now a different spirit. You see that? It's like, no, this is the beginning of the golden age, right? This is the beginning, the start of something great. Here we go. So since the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the philosophical emphasis in the Latin West was concerned with more theological constructs than the intrinsic nature of humanity. But this changed with the Renaissance as the Italians began to rediscover their rich ancient heritage. Yet the rediscovery of Roman culture was still not enough to foster a spirit that is often defined as humanism. For the current philosophical system in the Latin West still would not permit such a conception as wedged as it was with this Aristotelian scholasticism, accompanied by its ever-present hierarchical system, crowned with a god above humanity and further down the pecking order, right? As for the creation of the universe, the standard perspective taught by the medieval church was that it was created, out of nothing, ex nihilo. In this view, all creation specifically began at one point in time with no legacy of continuity or of eternity. The relationship between God and humanity emphasized the latter's separate nature. We are separate by nature. The inherent divide between deity and mortal. But with the arrival of Plato to the West and the philosophical worldview as espoused by the Neoplatonist thinkers inspired by him, the understood place of humanity in relation to God, and even more importantly, to himself, utterly changed. Instead of the universe as created out of nothing, as a completely separate and arbitrary creation, the Neoplatonists taught that both the spiritual and the material world emanated from God, that humanity was a result of this continuous process, and that we are part of the nature of God, that in fact we are an expression of it, made in his image in the Platonic as well as the biblical sense. One mystic humanist writer living at the time, a certain Pico della Mirandola, lived from 1463 to 1494, explored many philosophical systems popular at this time, beginning with Aristotle and the medieval understanding of his teachings as espoused by the Muslim philosopher Averroes. So let's take a look at the next picture. I think it's going to be Pico della Mirandola. Let's see if that is him. It could be him. It may or may not be. Well, that's pretty good. Let's go to the next one. It's a little bit on Platonism. I mean, that's good. There he is. Let's hold that for a little bit. Yet it was his eventual encounter with the Greek philosopher Plato while in Florence that truly fired his beliefs. From Plato, Pico came to believe that humanity was directly part of the continuum of God, an extension of his radiant divinity by being made in his image. Based on this assertion, Pico taught humanity was able to accomplish more than what was taught by the medieval church at that time. That, in fact, no limits or borders could be placed upon the human potential. Did you catch that? That no limits or borders could be placed upon the human potential. That we could aspire to the greatest of heights, to places that exceed even our current imagination. And he believed God gave us the free will to choose this higher spiritual existence, that we could be, in a sense, as the angels, but even more than they, if only we realized the potential within ourselves. Pico's philosophy became central to what would later become defined as humanism during the Renaissance. It is Plato, though, that is the center idea that makes this all happen, right? Pico's God wished us to use our intellect, our creativity, our imagination to create a better world here and now. And his God wished us to change, to continually transform ourselves. For Pico taught that change was the one constant in the universe. And to be true to the image of God, we must change as exemplified by God himself, who was presented in this dynamic rather than static universe. Remember, for Aristotle, it's a static universe, but for Plato, it is this constant idea of emanations going forth. Thank you. That's a great image. Thank you, Margie. So there you have it, right? Now, he was born near the Italian city of Mirandola, a small autonomous county located near Ferrara. He's born of an aristocratic family, but he was sent to study canon law because, mom wanted him to. But as soon as mom died, he quickly decided to become a philosopher. He went to the University of Ferrara. Then he studied at the University of Padua. One of the reasons why he chose Padua is because it was a center of Aristotelian thought at that time. Now, you want to hear about him because again, so you see the connection, right? Platon, Ficino, and now we're going to, of course, Pico, right? And this is how things all stir up. So, while Pico was pretty accomplished at Greek and Latin, here he learned Hebrew, Aramaic, and Arabic. He had a Jewish instructor for the Kabbalah by the name of Eliah, and who also idealized Moses Maimonides, and the, of course, Islamic scholar Averroes. Then, in 1484, Pico met Lorenzo di Medici and Marsilio Ficino in Florence, and immediately they became close friends. Shouldn't there be a movie about this? I don't know. Just saying, this would be a great movie. In fact, they became very close. It just so happened that on the day Pico met Marsilio Ficino, on the very day Ficino had published his translations of the works of Plato from Greek all into Latin. It's the exact day. So as a result, Pico said, right time, right place. This is providence at work, right? Lorenzo di Medici immediately extended his patronage to Count Pico, faithfully protecting him until his death, until 1492. That is Lorenzo's death. At this point, Pico made himself very acquainted with the philosophy of Plato. He was Aristotelian. Now he finds Plato, and Plato's going to change him. In fact, it changed his whole worldview. While he still maintained a respect for Aristotle, Pico now made Plato the main architect for most of his principal overarching ideas. They're only modified here and there by insights gathered from Aristotle. So there's a change. After his stay in Florence, Pico journeyed to Paris, the center of Aristotelian studies, but did not stay long. Here, Pico presented a defense of the technical terminology that clarified the use of Latin. But then he went. Pico began to dream. He began to dream. You want to hear this? He began to dream of a unified theory of all philosophy. What? Beginning with Plato and Aristotle, and he wanted to organize a forum of the best philosophical minds at the time to create this potential harmony of all knowledge from all religions, yes, all religions and philosophical systems known at that time. Wait, when was this? Yeah, this is the 1480s. Why so progressive? We'll see what goes wrong later on, but right now everything's great. This belief system will be inclusive of ancient Greek and Roman beliefs, Judaism and Islam and Zoroastrianism. This becomes the basis for his right. Somebody says theosophy, right? This becomes the basis of his 900 thesis. So in his later oration on the dignity of man, Pico describes how he attempted to reconcile Aristotelian ideas and Averroism and with Platonism, but realizes this task was very difficult. He says, we have proposed a harmony between Plato and Aristotle, such as many before this time indeed believed to exist, but which no one has satisfactorily established. Boethius, amongst Latin writers, promised to compose such a harmony, but he never carried his proposal to completion. St. Augustine also writes in his writings that many others tried to prove the same thing. That is, that the philosophies of Plato and Aristotle were identical and by the most subtle arguments. And so he kind of goes on and talks about that. So he wants to do that same thing. He wants to set out to accomplish the impossible, to bring all these philosophies together. And he, of course, he wrote his 900 Thesis, the set in motion. Pico did not realize he could not accomplish this unification. Sorry, he did realize he could not accomplish this on his own. He wanted to bring the best minds together. So what is he going to do? On his way to Rome to publish his 900 Thesis, he's ready to go. It's going to happen. Let's bring all the religions and philosophies of the world together. He becomes involved in a scandal. He attempted to run away with the wife of one of Lorenzo's cousins, but was soon caught. He was hurt and he was thrown in prison, but then released because of Lorenzo's mediation. We're recovering from his injuries. Pico came upon manuscripts that further transformed his philosophy. He came across, of course, the Chaldean oracles, and that changed. So he wrote Ficino as follows. He said, divine providence, he says to Ficino, caused certain books to fall into my hands. They are Chaldean books, and there's a gap here. And then of Esdras, of Zoroaster, of Melchior, oracles of the Magi, which contain a brief and dry interpretation of Chaldean philosophy, but full of mystery, unquote. So here also Pico became enamored with the Kabbalah and the writings of Hermes Trismegistus. Pico became determined to harmonize these now beliefs onto all the others. Just bring them all together. Do you guys know this? Once again, Pico was on his way back to Rome. Come on, Pico, you're going to make it this time. We know, we're rooting for you to publish his 900 Thesis. Hey, but you know, that sidetrack really helped, right? And he wanted to meet the very best philosophical minds there from all over the Latin West to discuss and to debate and to consider his proposals, and to have their own ideas to his own. To accompany his 900 Thesis, Pico wrote his Oration on the Dignity of Man. Many of Pico's insights were recorded in this work and captured the spirit of Renaissance humanism in this one work. Immediately, in fact, at the introduction of this work, Pico reveals the great expanse of his knowledge, moving in areas that were often considered taboo during his era. He states as follows. He says, most esteemed fathers, I have read in the ancient writings of the Arabians that Abdallah the Saracen, on being asked what on this stage, so to say, of the world seemed to him most evocative of wonder, replied that there was nothing to be seen more marvelous than man. And that celebrated exclamation of Hermes Trismegistus, what a great miracle is man, Asclepius confirms this opinion, period. Here, in one sentence, Pico brought together the declaration of the centrality of humanity as espoused by a legendary god-man revered by the Greeks, Egyptians, and Romans with an Arabic mystic. Yet he also esteemed the prophet Zoroaster as well as Pythagoras. While recognizing that humanity was of central importance to many of the ancients, Pico admits that he was not completely convinced at first until he fully considered the question, stating, and still, as I reflected upon the basis assigned for these estimations, I was not fully persuaded by the diverse reasons advanced for the preeminence of human nature, that man is the intermediary between creatures, that he is the familiar of the gods above him, as he is the lord of the beings beneath him, that by the acuteness of his senses, the inquiry of his reason, and the light of his intelligence, he is the interpreter of nature, set midway between the timeless unchanging and flux of time, the living union, as the Persians say, the very marriage hymn of the world, and by David's testimony, but little lower than the angels. These reasons are all, without question, of great weight. Nevertheless, they do not touch the principal reasons, those, that is to say, which justify man's unique right for such unbounded admiration. Why, I asked, should we not admire the angels themselves and the beatific choirs more? At long last, however, I feel that I have come to some understanding of why man is the most fortunate being of living things, and consequently deserving of all admiration, of what may be the condition in the hierarchy of beings assigned to him, which draws upon him the envy, not of the brutes alone, but of the astral beings and of the very intelligences which dwell beyond the confines of the world, a thing surpassing belief and smiting the soul with wonder. Still, how could it be otherwise? For it is on this ground that man is, with complete justice, considered and called a great miracle and being worthy of all admiration. So you can see, very humanistic, but what happens is that Pico understands humanity to be God's unique creation that followed the fashion of the earth that already possessed its own eternal prototypes emanated from him. But for humanity, we were an exception, for there was a direct idea that we are based upon the image. God the Father, the mightiest architects, he says, had already raised in accordance, according to the precepts of his hidden wisdom, this world we see, the cosmic dwelling of divinity. Now, you want to follow this because it'll become important later on. The cosmic dwelling of divinity, a temple most august. He had already adorned the super celestial region with intelligences, infused these heavenly globes with the life of immortal souls, and set the fermenting dung heap of inferior world teeming with every form of animal. He kind of goes on and on. It's a very long quote, but what he basically is saying is that as above, so below, we have the image of God, and as God creates, we create. And so we are an extension of that. So therefore, whenever we're creating something, whenever we're making something, God is working, or the divine is working through us. We, in a sense, become God. So what happens also is this another idea that we are the microcosm of the macrocosm, that there's a connection there. Of course, he overthrows Augustine and these ideas. And what happens, so what happens is, as for our position in the universe, when humanity exercised the attributes of God, we became, according to Pico, actively involved in the microcosm within the macrocosm of God's universe, or as he states, where we became the parvis mundus, the small universe. To discover God then meant not to look outside of yourself. To discover God meant not to look outside of yourself, but within us, realizing that God, who fashioned, provided the guide for who we are within us. Because God was both outside and within us, we could come to recognize and empower this divine potential. I'll say it again. We can come to empower this divine potential within ourselves. This potential then was unlimited by deduction, because if God is unlimited, then therefore we are unlimited through our creative process, connecting to the monad through the pleroma into ourselves and into our creative abilities. Well, who would listen to this? Michelangelo? Oh, let's go to some pictures here. Maybe I think I have the picture of it here. Yeah, Michelangelo. So the next one. Oh, these are really good. This is a cool. This is actually his own writing. That's him. That's his writing about the universe. Go to the next one. There's another one too. Go to the next one. That's how he sets up the universe too. These are pretty great charts. Yeah, I love that. Go to the next one. He also combined his ideas of the Kabbalah. And so this is how he puts the Kabbalah together with his own belief system. This is really cool. Go to the next one. I mean, he went everywhere in his philosophical ideas. This is the page from his 900 thesis. A little water stain up there. That's great. Yeah, I'm glad I'm showing that one. Next one. Oh yeah, this I'll show this later. But this well, what is okay? This right here is the image of the liberal arts. So we'll talk about that soon. Go to the next one, and this will be the liberal arts too. The 7 liberal arts. You have, of course, grammar, logic, and rhetoric. This is the trivium. Then you have the quadrium, which is geometry, arithmetic. I think it's astronomy, and then I think that's music. So that's them. But yeah, so the liberal arts get a big boost because now that we're focusing on humanity, right? Now that we're focusing on humanity, we need to focus in on humanity's creative aspects, because to understand God, we have to understand its image, and the image is humanity. In order to understand humanity, we have to understand who we are. And how do we understand who we are? Through the liberal arts, through understanding the human condition, understanding what we produce, what we create, how we think, and yes, in turn, in short, the humanities. So you get the liberal arts and the humanities from this idea. Woohoo! Okay, go to the next one. You're blowing your mind, I know. Oh, it's a terrible picture. I'm sorry, but this is okay, so let's go here. So Michelangelo still holds this terrible image. It's really small. Michelangelo understood himself as giving birth to images that were not only divinely inspired, but divinely created through him. He peered into the unsculpted blocks and believed that the image of God, in which was intended by God, was already there. All he had to do is to release this image from its stone prison through his chisel, as guided by God's inspiration. So there's a lot of these images that you'll see in Florence that are unfinished and are intended to be unfinished, because these are sculptures coming out of the stone. So these are the images that are already there. He just is the one who is freeing it. Okay, we'll stop there, that one picture. so there you have it. So what is the importance of this idea? Yeah, Michelangelo. and the center, of course, now it becomes important in art that before, we were just kind of like, it is these stucco images that were really flat, and the whole focus is the idea of the story, what's going on there. But now it's like, well, since humanity is the image of God, then we should depict humanity as realistic as possible in every way. And so art changes. We need to have perspective, not only when it comes to humanity, but nature in general. We need to be as realistic as possible. So what happens? Art is directly affected with this change of philosophy. But at the very heart of it is the idea of humanity. To understand humanity is to understand God. In fact, these ideas will inspire a guy by the name of William Shakespeare, right? To have his Prince Hamlet declare, what a piece of work is man, how noble in reason, how infinite in faculty, in form and moving, how express and admirable, in action, how like an angel, in apprehension, how like a god, the beauty of the world, the paragon of animals. Where is this coming from? From these ideas, right? Are you seeing it now? You're waking up, you're going, wait. And so this universe, right, is now becoming, wait a second, if we're all the image of God, this will be the next one politically, if we're all the image of God, therefore, we are equal. Get it? In Aristotelian areas, you have the stratification of society. Right? The kings, right? Nobles, merchants, going down, of course, way up there. You got of course, the hierarchy, the priests and so forth, right? And further up still, you got the angels and you got God, right? You have this hierarchy. Now, all of a sudden, this this new understanding of knowledge has changed, or suddenly now, if we all are the image of God, then humanity, we're all equal with each other, right? So therefore, we all have natural rights. In fact, we have natural, inalienable rights because we are all born equal in the image of God. And you can see where these ideas based on Platonism, not Aristotle. You never get there with Aristotle. Aristotle, he's the one, if you're born a slave, you stay a slave. He was used for apologetics by the South to support slavery. It goes all the way back, all the way back to the 1200s, right? Thomas Aquinas, right? This reinterpretation of Christianity. Aristotle supported hierarchies. It supported the nobility. It supported the medieval world order. It supported this feudalistic system. But when it comes to the reinterpretation of Plato with its Neoplatonic concepts, suddenly now there's this new idea that will have a political ramification that will move into Montesquieu and others, and of course, obviously, the founding fathers of the United States. So anyway, are you guys waking up? You guys are understanding how important this idea is, even when it comes to political understandings. So Plato becomes the center. Okay, so yeah, at the center of Pico's theological and philosophical discourse was the freedom of choice, for one could choose to realize the divine potential within themselves, or they could deny it. They could stifle it, and so become just like the beast of the fields, or descend into something truly vile. Neoplatonism typically positioned humanity between the spiritual and the material world with the hope of gradual ascension, while many Neoplatonists also consider the possibility of descending further into the material world as an option. For the Latin West, it was Pico who is often recognized as articulating that humanity had a choice. They could, by their thoughts and actions, rise in the chain of being, becoming like a god, never a god per se, or they could fall into corruption, entering into a lower state. Pico, of course, viewed this universe as ever-changing and shifting, not remaining static, infused with this dynamic aspect. For him, the one constant in the universe, as I said before, was change. Always moving, always creating, always manifesting in new and often unexpected ways, because humanity was an image of God. As God was always changing, so was humanity. As God was always transforming, so was humanity in thoughts, in beliefs, in philosophy. So it justifies that we can change. Human progress is possible. So yes, we can have a better society. See how these ideas support the modern age? It's like, wait, we can become better than ourselves. Human progress is possible. No longer do you have this idea that, hey, we're just counting the minutes until the end of the world. There's an apocalypse coming along. The world's getting worse and worse ever since the fall. Now, all of a sudden, it's like the world's going to get better and better and better. Because of this understanding, humanity ultimately had the power of self-transformation and the freedom to express it. We were not intended to be captured within an Aristotelian category, much like a pinned bug in some collection, complete with an already predetermined label that described all we were, giving room for nothing more. No. But if anything, Pico believed we were constantly in a state of potential metamorphosis, moving from a caterpillar to a butterfly and beyond the butterfly to something beyond our current state of imagination. Change was the truth of the universe, along with our ability, our freedom to explore these changes. These are all my words. So we were gifted by God as the extension of him, with the freedom of choice and the ability inherently meant that humanity also possessed the freedom of inquiry, to question all things. The church A fish who recognized that this potential was originally intended for humanity, but countered that we lost this freedom once Adam and Eve had sinned in the Garden of Eden, that we lost this privilege inquiry without limit because of our sin nature, which automatically tainted our ability to discern between freedom and disobedience. You know what? Pico disagreed, believing that actively pursuing this freedom was part of God's plan all along. In fact, while Pico believed that in nature generally things change because they are forced to do so, humanity was intended to be the exception to the rule because of the gift of free will. We can choose. We never lost our free will at the Garden of Eden, so we never lost our will to question the workings of the universe, to learn more about it, and to change our understanding. I guess I'll read one more thing from him. It says, at one point concerning the idea of humanity's freedom to be who they wish to be, both good and bad, superior and inferior, Pico declares, oh, unsurpassed generosity of God the Father, oh, wondrous and unsurpassable felicity of man, to whom it is granted to have what he chooses, to be what he wills to be. The brutes from the moment of their birth bring with them, as Lucilius says, from their mother's womb, all that they will ever possess. The highest spiritual beings were, from the very moment of creation, or soon hereafter, fixed in the mode of being which would be theirs throughout measureless eternities. But upon man, at the moment of his creation, God bestowed seeds pregnant with all possibilities, the germ of every form of life. Whichever of these a man shall cultivate, the same will mature and bear fruit in him. If vegetative, he will become a plant. If sensual, he will become brutish. If rational, he will reveal himself as a heavenly being. If intellectual, he will be an angel and soon the Son of God. He says that. And if dissatisfied with the lot of all creatures, he should recollect himself into the center of his own unity. Recollect himself into the center of his own unity. He will there become one spirit with God in a solitary darkness of the Father, who is set above all things, himself transcending all creatures. We transcend. Woo! All right. A lot of mysticism. Okay, well, and as I told you before, Pico talks about the liberal arts. He says, I won't read the whole thing, don't worry. In fact, however, the dignity of the liberal arts, which I am about to discuss, he says, and their value to us is attested not only by the Mosaic and Christian mysteries, but also by the theologies of the most ancient times. What else is to be understood by the stages through which the initiates must pass through the mysteries of the Greeks? These initiates, after being purified by the arts, which you might call expeditory, moral philosophy, and dialectic, were granted admission to the mysteries. And so he basically is saying, hey, the liberal arts, it's not just a Christian thing, it's a universal thing. It's connected to pagan ideas as well. In the same quote, then he goes on and talks about Plato and Plato's philosophy and so forth. It's really beautiful. He talks about the leader of the muses, Bacchus, revealing to us in our moments of philosophy through the mysteries, that is, the visible signs of nature, the invisible things of God, will make us drunk with the richness of the house of God, and therefore, if like Moses, we shall prove entirely faithful, most sacred theology, and so forth and so on. So it's pretty amazing stuff. He also developed a magical system, a very well-developed magical system based upon his philosophical understandings. So if you want, I'll talk about the magic. Okay. This is the beginning also of that system. I have also proposed certain theses concerning magic, in which I have indicated that magic has two forms, he says. One consists wholly in the operation of powers of demons, and consequently, this appears to me, as God is my witness, a monstrous thing. The other proves that when thoroughly investigated, to be nothing else but the highest realization of natural philosophy. The Greeks noted both these forms, however, because they considered the first form wholly undeserving the name of magic. They call it gotia, reserving the term magia to the second. and understanding by it the highest and most perfect wisdom. The term magus is in the Persian tongue, according to Periphery, he says, means the same as interpreter and worshiper of the divine in our language. Moreover, fathers, the disparity and dissimilarity between these arts is the greatest that can be imagined. And he goes on, and he talks about Empedocles, he talks about Plato, talks about Zoroaster. It's a pretty amazing thing. So he does talk about magic in detail, and I know our time is limited, but I have a whole paragraph here just on his ideas of magic. So Pico, he finally gets to Rome. Under the title, so he gets there in 1486. He publishes his 900 thesis, and Pope Innocent III is there. Right? He wished to review his thesis first before he would permit them to be debated. Now, Innocent III was a rather dismal character, supporting Kramer's investigation against those doing bad magic via his papal bull known as the Summus Deserantes Ephebalis in 1484. And he actually declared a crusade against the Waldensians in 1486. And so when this pope reads Pico's work, he inspected it not with an open mind that would engage discussion, but with a focus to find possible heresy in it. And that he did, deeming 13 of his theses as heretical. The Pope declares that this work was in part heretical. I'm quoting him, in part the flower of heresy. Several are scandalous and offensive to pious ears. Most do nothing but reproduce the error of the pagans. And so you see here, he says, others are capable of inflaming the impertinence of the Jews. A number of them, finally, under the pretext of natural philosophy, favor arts that are enemies to the Catholic faith and to the human race. Innocent III next told Pico he must retract these statements, and he did, but then wrote an apology concerning them. But the Pope did not want explanations. He wanted obedience and submission, and so established the Inquisition to force Pico to declare another apology and to retract everything he said. Again, Pico submitted an apology, but eventually he found himself in trouble and fled to France in 1488, where he was duly arrested by Philip II, but later released through the help of Lorenzo di Medici, who was then convinced the Pope to permit him to stay under the protection of Florence. Still, Pico was in constant danger. I do want to mention that Pico, some people are interested a little bit about his magical system. So I'll backtrack just a little bit to his own words about the beneficent magic. And this, of course, also was another problem that was considered suspect, that he was a dealer in these kinds of mysteries and these kinds of magics. He says as follows, the beneficent magic in calling forth, as it were, from their hiding places into the light, the powers which the largest of God has sown and planted in the world, does not itself work miracles so much as serve nature as she works her wonders, scrutinizing with greater penetration that harmony of the universe which the Greeks with greater aptness of terms call sympatheia, and grasping the mutual affinity of all things, she applies to each thing those inducements called the yugas, I-U-G-G-E-S, of the magicians, most suited to its nature, so like unto like. Thus it draws forth into public notice the miracles which lie hidden in the recesses of the world, in the womb of nature, in the storehouses and secret vaults of God, as though she herself were their artificer. As the farmer weds his elm to the vines, so the Magus unites earth to the heaven, that is, the lower orders to the endowments and powers of the higher. Hence, it is that this later magic appears the most divine and salutary, as the former presents a monstrous and destructive visage. But the deepest reason for the differences is the fact that the first magic, delivering man over to the enemies of God, alienates him from God, while the second, beneficent magic, excites in him an admiration for the works of God, which flowers naturally into charity, faith, and hope. For nothing so surely impels us to worship God than the assiduous contemplation of his miracles. And when by means of this natural magic we shall have examined these wonders more deeply, we shall more ardently be moved to love and worship him in his works, until finally we shall be compelled to burst into song. The heavens, all of the earth is filled with the majesty of your glory. So anyway, so that's kind of a little bit more on his magic. So it is basically a universal sympathy conception of like attract like that we see with Chino, and we also see later on, obviously, with Cornelius Agrippa, who will further create that. So Pico is in trouble. Pico eventually, he's tired of running. He's tired of flying about. He's always in danger of papal agents trying to kill him as a heretic. And so what's going to happen is he becomes a broken man under pressure. He just wants to be accepted by the church again. As a result, Pico decides to become a monk and reestablish his relations again to his old friend and the anti-humanist monk by the name of Savernala. You've heard of him, Savernala. In fact, Pico willingly burned his own works in order to convince him and others of his sincerity. Then suddenly, in 1494, Pico was poisoned. Many believe Pico was becoming too close to Savonarola of Florence, whose beliefs appeared to be opposite of that Pico used to believe in former years. In fact, many people say they poisoned Pico because it was just too hard to see him under the mantle of such an evil man. And Savonarola is an evil man. We'll go into that briefly. We're almost done, though. Another Renaissance Neoplatonist, of course, and I have his book sitting right here. Actually, my microphone's on. I won't move it. But that is, of course, Henrik Cornelius Agrippa, 1486 to 1535. He's the next one that defines this belief system further. He imported the entire Platonic universe of the one, the monad, emanating ideal forms into a universal magical system, following the precedent of the Neoplatonist Iamblichus. Also, Agrippa proposed that from the mind of the one, or the monad or God, created angelical and celestial secondary causes known as intelligences, with God giving the seal of his ideas. God giving, this is different, the seal of his ideas into these intelligences. From here, the intelligences employed the heavens and stars as instruments, releasing these duplicates of the form to humanity within the terrestrial realm. Agrippa believed that the macrocosm of the universe resembled the microcosm of the body, for in the same manner, the celestial soul, or the intelligences, control the material body of the universe. So you have, of course, same way our soul or intelligences control our own body. So it all connects together, all as one. So there you have it. In fact, what happens is that, so the method by which we can send commands with our intelligence to our physical body was believed by Agrippa and Ficino to be identical to the way intelligences or celestial souls send commands to the material universe. Because the entire universe was viewed as interconnected with these forces that are they're neither good nor bad, simply celestial sympathies or waves or chords connected to one another like a gigantic mystical web, which were also connected in turn to vital spirits. The universe became judged as neutral. Again, the universe then becomes neutral through these sympathies. Hence, these celestial sympathies could be moved through certain actions made by the actions of those who wish to cause certain changes within the natural realm. Agrippa, Ficino, and other Renaissance Neoplatonists attempted to argue that the universal magic they were describing and recommending for use in certain situations, often nobly for health reasons, was not in any way spiritual magic and certainly did not employ demons of any kind. No, they asserted they were employing natural magic, which was intended to subject natural things to natural causes to be formed in a wondrous way. I'm actually quoting, as well as to apply natural things to obtain the services, of the celestials who could choose or not choose to respond. So using neutral means to connect to these celestials, but they have the choice to listen to you or not. The Neoplatonic conception that these universal sympathies were in essence neutral, but could be orchestrated to maneuver at one's personal will through natural magic, proved to be very popular during the 16th and 17th centuries and offered many local practitioners a much needed explanation of how they perceived their magical world, explaining that they operated with forces that were neither good or evil, simply the universal magical stage upon which the magical actors are the real ethical participants. So the actors are ethical, but the means are are not subject to that ethical standard. In this view, more responsibility fell upon the individual practitioner to be ethically good in their magical practices. Yet at the same time, the trade-off was that they had a way to defend themselves from the assumption that working with any magic whatsoever made one guilty by association, wherein all such acts of manipulation were considered evil according to the church. Not that such elaborate Neoplatonic defenses really worked as a defense before the more simple-minded or doctrinally hyper-conservative folks bent upon killing the fast-talking magician and not really interested in being convinced otherwise, but this was a defense. It's like, hey, you know what? The operation itself, it's neutral. This is just part of the world. It's woven in there, these chords. We connect them, we maneuver them. So the responsibility lies on us, on our decisions. Still, the question did arise concerning exactly who were evil as opposed to good natural magicians. A wax figure or a piece of cloth taken from someone was believed to be able to cure them using these natural magics through universal sympathy, but they could conversely hurt or kill them too. Because vital spirits were seen in all natural things that could be manipulated, a person could be harmed by merely getting something connected with him. From a strand of hair or a fingernail to even his sweat or excrement, right? All contained vital spirits and all had the potential for magical manipulation in a harmful way. And so more and more, even with these new Neoplatonic explanations, the pressure fell upon the individual magical worker, the practitioner's ethics, attempting to see if he or she working these natural magics were good or evil. So it's the idea. So it is neutral. The concept is neutral here. Well, so there we have it. So natural medicine, these ideas, of course, will continue on to Johannes Hartlieb, a Bavarian physician, Thomas Norton, obviously, John Dee, right, which is another talk. I don't even want to go there with that, the preeminent advisor of Queen Elizabeth I. He kind of added a further layer with Enochian magic. and that one cannot separate science from magic. I'm talking on it, I'm not wanting to, but I'm doing it. Of course, he and his friend Edward Kelly both helped organize the Enochian magic and so forth. And of course, and then meanwhile, other things were happening. Well, I'm not done, not even close to done, but I think this is a good place. Well, I do want to say something else. Just a few other things. So the Renaissance brought all these major changes. You can see it, right? So I mean, we really got to the heart of why humanism is understood the way it is and how it got started. If you listen to every part of this talk, you could see this natural sequence. But I do want to bring up just one other little thing, just a little bit here, because with the Greek, remember the Latin West, they don't have Greek; it's all Latin, the Latin Vulgate, which is translated by Jerome, is the Bible in the Latin West. Remember, the original New Testament was written in Greek. No non-Aramaic Greek. We can go into that one a little bit later if you want to, because I read Greek. I do textual studies in Greek. There were Aramaic aspects, but it was not completely composed. So anyway, it's Greek. That's the original language, right? So what happens here is that the Latin West doesn't have it's all Latin Vulgate. With the Renaissance, now we get a whole bunch of a great variety of Greek manuscripts, a whole variety of Greek manuscripts, and not only of the New Testament, but also of the early church fathers. And they start looking at these and they go, wait a second, Jerome messed up the translation of the Latin Vulgate for the official Bible of the Catholic Church at that time. That's not exactly what the New Testament says. They're finding all kinds of problems. Lorenzo Valla, by the way, discovers that the so-called donation of Constantine, that the Constantine gave the West to the Pope and the East to of course the emperors, through Pope Sylvester, that this was in fact actually a forgery from the 8th century rather than the 4th century, because they would use this forgery, the donation to Constantine, to support the idea of the patrimony of the papacy and the papal state. Yes, they would use this document to support the idea that there should be a papal state, and now it turns out to be a forgery. This was not popular with the papacy, because they're looking at the language and going, this is not matching up. But also another guy by the name of Erasmus, who's a prince of humanists. What he did is he brought together all the surviving Greek manuscripts of the New Testament together from all over the continental Europe to create the definitive Greek source of the New Testament that will be used in all subsequent translations later on. And Erasmus realized that, oh, wait a second, nobody wants the New Testament in the original language because it contradicts what happens. So what happens is that obviously Jerome will translate the Bible in the latter part of 300s into Latin from the Greek, and this becomes the mainstay for Western theology, the mainstay. And of course, words change. Even the interpretation of these Latin words change, and they build all this Western theology based on these words, and they're moving further and further away to the original meaning. Then during the Renaissance, all of a sudden, we got Erasmus. Now we have a consistent text of the New Testament, and they're like, hey, they don't, it turns out a lot of the suppositions of Thomas Aquinas is based on a Latin translation that's problematic, and it is not reflected in the original Greek at times. It's like, what do you do with this? This is causing all this controversy. And this, the church is going, this is not good. This is not good. The Renaissance is bad for us. And this change is going on in Northern Europe to the point where many are going to say, why don't we just have the Bible written in the vernacular? Why does it have to be in Latin? We'll do a better job of that. Erasmus got so much. He was attacked quite a bit, and he actually wrote a work called "In Praise of Folly" in 1509, and he says some not very nice things to those people who criticize him for creating this corpus, because ignorance, right? So he says perhaps it would be wise to pass over the theologians in silence. That short-tempered and crew is unpleasant to deal with. They will proclaim me a heretic. With this thunderbolt, they terrify the people they don't like. Their opinion of themselves is so great that they behave as if they were already in heaven. They look down pityingly on other men as so many worms. A wall of imposing definitions, conclusions, corollaries, and explicit and implicit propositions protects them. They are full of big words and newly invented terms. He attacks monks too, who attack him. Next to the theologians and happiness are those who commonly call themselves the religious monks. Both are religious and monks. Both are complete misnomers, since most of them stay as far away from religion as possible, and no people are seen more often in public. They are so detested that it is considered bad luck if one crosses your path, and yet they are highly pleased with themselves. They cannot read, and so they consider it the height of piety to have no contact with literature. Most of them capitalize on their dirt and poverty by whining for food from door to door. So you can see it's not going over very well. And so now all of a sudden, there's a response to this Renaissance. The Inquisition is on it. Now that it's moved into biblical conceptions, this is empowering ideas that will lead to the Protestant Reformation. It needs to be stopped. And so what happens is it has a momentary stop towards the end of Lorenzo de' Medici's control of Florence. The Domitian, he's a Domitian, named Saviano, a firm advocate of the scholastic school of thought, became influential in Florence from 1494 to 1498. Believing the Renaissance was corrupting Christianity with its Greek and Roman filth, destroying much of his self-proclaimed immortal art, as well as burning books he deemed were heretical. So, in fact, in 1497, Savonarola ordered his legion of boys, who were his followers, to go door to door, collecting all materials connected to what he deemed as degenerating moral virtues, for a grand, what he called, bonfire of vanities, inclusive of all cosmetics, mirrors, fine dresses, women's hats, musical instruments, what is he called, dirty art and pictures, games, especially chess, fine paintings that lack Christian themes, yes, and pagan books. As for immoral sculptures, if you had an immoral sculpture, you received the statue of a good saint in exchange. You exchange it for a good, okay. Of course, he closed down all the taverns and made it forbidden to gamble. So one of his firmest enemies actually was the Pope, Alexander, 1492 to 1503. I have his letter here. I'm not going to read it. But eventually, Savonarola causes enough problems for him to be excommunicated in 1497. And then also the Florentines went against him because he started to affect trade. Nobody wants to trade in a place that's under this religious theocracy as opposed by him. And then fortunately, this monster was tried and executed in 1498. When the executioner lit the flames to burn Savonarola, he exclaimed, "The one who wanted to burn me is now himself put to the flames." Still, because of his anti-papal views, many Protestants later respected him, most notably Martin Luther. But the Renaissance, it stopped for a little while. I mean, it hesitated in Italy, but especially in Florence. But then all of a sudden, even though its power base in Florence went away, still what will happen is the Medici family continued on as various popes. And so much of the Renaissance continued in a big way in Rome itself, notably Pope Leo X, who was Pope from 1513 to 1521, Pope Clement VII, 1523 to 1534, and Pope Pius IV, 1559 to 1565, even Pope Leo the 11th, in 1605. And so what happens is these popes will now show patronage towards Renaissance thought, and they themselves, in many ways, will embrace even Platonic ideas and ideals. And so there you have it. Of course, these ideas will continue to encourage uh, uh, other concepts in astronomy. For example, Copernicus will be inspired, which I won't go into, but I will just say that Nicholas Copernicus will also have his ideals. He's a Polish astronomer, and of course he rejected the Earth-centered or geocentric universe in favor, obviously, of a heliocentric universe. He does go to Italy, and he's inspired by knowledge of the Greek East. And in fact, he taught himself Greek through Theodorus Gaza's grammar, and with the Bologna, and inspired by Greek ideas and thoughts. He had this ideal or concept, because in Plato's allegory of the cave, the sun is the center, and so he has this idea of perfect circles, and the sun is the center. Did you know that the sun as the center was even an early ancient thought? And so you have this idea of the sun as the center, but the problem is he had this complete circular orbit, because he, as a Platonist, because he was a Platonist, he participated in this Renaissance thought. As a circle, a circle was considered perfect for Platonists, but the problem is, if you do the math, it doesn't work very well. So what's going to happen is later on, Kepler, through Tyche, will have this idea that maybe it's not a perfectly circular orbit, it's an elliptical orbit, and that kind of fixes the math a little bit there. And then, of course, obviously, you have Galileo as naked eye verification of these ideas, and of course, he's also condemned and so forth. But these ideas of moving from a geocentric to heliocentric universe is also a natural byproduct of the Renaissance and the change of humanity and how we understand ourselves in relation to the cosmos. So we have covered so much today. We have covered some of the deeper questions, I believe, when it comes to the Renaissance, the spirit of the Renaissance. Oh, there's a few things I do want to leave you with. I want to leave you with the idea that and I would love to write a book entitled this, How Plato Saved the West. But in many ways, the heritage of the Greeks and Romans, which are part of the Roman Empire, the Western Roman Empire fell, obviously, and in 476, the Eastern half continued into 1453. All that knowledge in religion and philosophy and mathematics and the science and so forth, it remained there, right? But then, of course, the first beginning of that end was the Latins attacking Constantinople in 1204, and of course that led to the first wave of scholars moving to Italy. Of course, the Byzantines or the Romans conquered it back in 1261, but what happens is it still more and more scholars during the latter part between 1261 to 1453 are kind of moving more and more to Italy, and with them, philosophical ideas, theological ideas, scientific ideas, ideas concerning humanity. They're all magical ideas, all of this, which are mixed with they're more cosmopolitan, bringing these ideas to the West. And so it kind of plants the seeds for those concepts. But, and then, of course, I mentioned before, Petrarch, you have the curiosity, antiquarian curiosity, so people are interested, but there need to be something behind it. You could be interested in the good old days, but you have to have something that brings it to the present and into the future. There has to be some kind of philosophy that motivates this nostalgic feeling to, hey, we can do this again. You can't, it doesn't happen with Aristotle. You know, Aristotle keeps everything status quo, system as usual. But you can have that with Plato. And so even though these scholars are coming from the east to the west, still it is Platon that is that trigger, being at the right place at the right time at this conference, the Ferrara Florence conference, and it just so happens that Cosmo de Medici is there, who's interested in being a patron of the arts. He's listening, and all of a sudden, there is a philosophy that we ourselves, as the image of God, can create things, that we have unlimited potential, and we have the sense of equality, and we have the sense of human progress. We can do all these things. All these things are possible because we absolutely reflect the divine. And so, as a result of that, the world changed. It is that trigger that connects to the modern era. Of course, obviously, it jumps over to empiricism, right? Of Bacon, right? It jumps into the scientific method. It moves into the scientific era, empiricism, but into the Enlightenment, right? And then, of course, obviously, it moves into the modern age as we know it, even from a political standpoint. This is a big deal. And so I'll say it again. Plato and the second Plato, Platon, saved the West. Did you guys like that? We're done. Thank you.